everyone. Welcome to another episode of UX Pathways, and I have the honor to be joined today by Mr. Dan Berlin. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, glad to have you. So glad to have you here because, you know, your teaching, being a part of your classes in the past has really inspired me and has, left me with a lot of great advice. And I was so excited to have you then be on the podcast to share your story and your path. And you've had a very, impressive career. Can you tell me about your current role and describe your journey?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So I am currently an independent researcher based outside of Boston. I've been doing this for 5 years, running Watch City Research. And my career started back in the tech support days. I graduated from undergrad with a degree in psychology, and not much I can do with a degree in psychology, so I went into tech support. And then one day I sat as a participant in a usability study. And I saw it was this beautiful melding of computer geekery and psychology, and said, this is for me. It was actually the Bentley University Design and Usability Center at the time who came into the company I was working at. I was asked to be a participant because it was the product I was working on. And then after that study, I quit my job and went to Bentley for 2.5 years to get an MBA and MS in Human Factors Information Design, which was wonderful. And then I did the agency thing for my UX career. I've actually never worked in-house for except for, consulting gigs. And I've lived the agency life, which I've loved. And I've been doing that for 18 years now. And I just love the variety of agency life, getting to work on in different domains and hear the different problems that people are dealing with, and being able to take the solutions that we come up with between companies and between domains. And that's what really drives me. And then, yeah, 5 years ago, I opened Watch City Research, and now I'm actually working on a PhD in business with a focus in experience design, hopefully going to make the transition into academia, but still keep one foot in industry. I think a big part of what the UX academic world needs is that beautiful mixture of academia plus what's actually happening in industry, and hopefully bring that to the students and give the students some real world examples and from my real world experience.
Yeah, I love it. You talked about your aha moment, being a participant, that kind of got you down the path. And then being an agency, I actually started myself in an agency, and that has never left me. Like I always think that way as a consultant, and I think that's an important mindset that you've applied. And now you're transitioning over to academia and moving down that path, which I know is one of your passions as well. And that's always interesting. I mean, UX across all of those things really transcends. And I think a lot of people have wondered, you know, UX, is that the path for me? And you definitely have a great story there. Could you define user experience? I know it's one of those things where everyone seems to have their own angle on what it means. And then why do you think it's important?
Yeah, so when I when I first graduated from the program, my view of usability, as it was, back then, it wasn't user experience quite yet, um, was narrow. I was really thinking about the interface and the clicking and the actual design elements. But then a few years later, working with some of the folks at the agency, I discovered service design, right? And how they are magnificently intertwined, right? We have this service that we're trying to provide to end users or customers or associates or whoever that last person on the end is, and the way that the service is designed will impact how that interface is, right? Whether that's a digital interface or an in-store interface. And so, when I define user experience these days, it is that higher level of how are we going to provide this service that an end user wants from us from end to end in such a way that aligns with their expectations, but also um, meets our business goals, right? There's whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, there's always two sides to the coin, as it were. And we need to align the end user goals with stakeholder needs, right? And that's why it's so important to have, and we've been saying this for 20 years, why it's so important to have a seat at the strategic table, right? In for for UXers to have a seat at the strategic table because UX is necessarily strategic, right? We are looking at those business goals and KPIs or OKRs or however you're measuring it, and seeing how that trickles down to the end user and ensuring that there is alignment. And when there isn't alignment, that's when usability breaks or expectations get broken or end users get angry, because they don't want to use the service anymore and they'll move on to somewhere else. And we don't want that, right? So I define user experience more at that higher level in terms of aligning stakeholder goals with user needs.
Yeah, and it's that constant balance between all those things. And I love that you talked about service design and really understanding the end-to-end experience. And that's how it started is when we obviously there's a history there when it comes to user experience, but here we are many years later where the questions are still being asked. And with the introduction of new technology out there, it always seems to stray someone's mind and say, well, maybe it's this thing, but it's really about understanding how all those things work together. And for you, you've talked about your journey. It sounds like you're now moving into another phase of your career. Is there some magic ingredient of how you adapt to change? Is there something that you typically are thinking about or a mantra you have?
So there's two things there.
Hmm.
I think it comes back to the stakeholders, right? It's really understanding the stakeholder goals, right? Because especially in agency life, that is going to change greatly between clients and from company to company. And really understanding not just their business goals. I feel like that's table stakes, right? That's at the core, but also how do they operate? Right? Because every company operates differently, and we need to align how we do our work, how we do our user research or user experience research and design with how the company operates, right? And that almost comes back to the service design aspect, right? We have to be our own service designers and understanding, what do product managers need, what do developers need, what do engineers need, what does everyone need here and how do they do their work, right? So that we can do our user experience work without um, disrupting things, right? UXers traditionally are, disruptors, right? Of or seen as disruptors, I should say, right? And we need to make sure that we disrupt less and facilitate more, right? And in terms of the mantra, it's funny, I almost wrote a LinkedIn article about or LinkedIn post about this today, and I may very well do it now. My overall mantra in life and in professional life as well is see a need, fill it, right? So we have a certain worldview and we have certain we uncover needs as we go about our life, whether it's a user's needs or a stakeholder's needs or a company's needs, right? And as UXers, we look at that whole path, and sometimes we see a need. And there are opportunities to fill that need and achieve the goals of the stakeholder, achieve the goals of the end user, right? And so, in short, it's really facilitating UX at the organization as best we can, not being a disruptor, and finding those needs and fulfilling them in such a way that aligns with how the business does business, right? Because every business operates in a different way and has different ways of making their bottom line. And we need to understand that. right? That's actually one of the things I love most about being a consultant is really understanding the business needs and the business operations so that when we come in and do our UX research, I'm not just handing them like this checklist of things to do that will disrupt their world. I'm handing them those actionable insights that will facilitate getting them from A to B as best we can.
I love that. I mean, the focusing on the problem, facilitating, understanding how the business is functioning, that is one thing that I've seen a lot talking about on this podcast, where it's the understanding that business. Sure, you've learned in school the UX methodologies, you understand that we have to figure out some way to help that end user. But are you speaking the business language? Are you understanding that each one is unique? And what you said exactly matches that, which I think is something that anyone that's thinking about getting into UX or is in UX and you're trying to figure out how to move forward, it's a critical piece. And this brings me to my next question, which I feel like we've been dancing around. A lot of people have been talking about it, but there seems to be some question out there if there's some type of technology or some hype that's currently going on that we should be thinking about? And is there something that we should consider and not be ignored right now as people in this space? And I've been surprised. Sometimes people have said different things, but I'm wondering from your position, is there something that in this space we should not be ignoring?
Well, the obvious answer is AI. But I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, to be honest. I'm not touching that topic with a 10-foot pole. I use
Sure.
AI in my work.
Right.
But there are a lot, there are a lot, there are other people who are more qualified to talk about AI and
Hmm.
have really enveloped themselves in it. I haven't had the time because of the PhD at the moment. But the current hype that should not be ignored is the constant rise and fall of UX at organizations, right? I've seen it a
Love
lot in
that
my
one.
career where I'm not going to name names in terms of companies, but I've seen like certain companies like have a robust UX department and then get rid of them all and then realize they needed it again and they hire UXers and then a new management comes in and then they get rid of them again, right? These are waves that we've seen throughout my entire career, right? Right now, I think we are in one of those lulls, right? We're seeing lots of people looking for jobs. We're seeing lots of layoffs. But also, I think that, or at least I hope that this is fairly temporary, right? In April of 2026, right? Where companies will come to realize that in order to make experiences that users want to use, no matter whether there's AI involved or not, we still need those UX experts, designers and research and content strategists and service design strategists that can help facilitate that, right? Because we understand the psychology involved. We understand like the design psychology involved. We bring like concepts like Gestalt and other psychological means to make these designs, right? And so the hype right now, as it were, is this lull in UX. But also, I really like to think that it is temporary, and by ensuring that we are using our best practices, right, and backing up our suggestions and insights with real data, right, real data from humans is how we are going to make the case for great UX and improve the experiences that we're looking to improve, whether it's a service design or an interaction design or whatever it is, right? There's no substitute for talking to a person, asking why multiple times, using a technique such as laddering, right, to get at root causes of their wants and needs so that we can design great experiences for them. And so it's a long way of saying, right, for the folks looking for UX jobs right now is to hang in there, right? I'd like to think that the companies will come to realize again that they need design, whether it is at the end of the, their process or it is whether it is at the strategic level, right? And hopefully we do get that seat at the table in the long run.
No, I mean, great observation. We've seen it before. I mean, we can look back at Jacob Nielsen has said in the past, like, oh, there's going to be so many UX jobs out there. It's going to be unbelievable. And there was an explosion of people that went into the field, and now there's a drought. But the reality is, more and more things becoming complex every day. More and more products are still looking to be the next big thing, and we know the answer to get to the end of it is that it has to have a good user experience. I would even say a great user experience at that point. So
And definitely, and I think, this goes back to the question, product management. I'm seeing UX almost bubble to the product management level, which I think is wonderful, right? A UXer doesn't need to have the job title of UX designer or UX researcher, right? We can become product managers or something on the product level to bring the UX jazz to the company, right? We can make impact in other ways. And honestly, maybe that is the way that we get a seat at the strategic table is to start taking our UX knowledge to other areas of the organization.
yeah, I mean, you said from the beginning you started in tech support, and we actually had a guest on a few years back that did the same thing and said, well, wait a minute, the users are having issues. I'm trying to solve the problem. I can apply user experience to the same thing. And I can see that connection there. And I think you might have started to answer my next question, but maybe build on top of it. And always people are looking for advice. They're either looking for a career change or they're looking to follow your path. It sounds like part of that is if I am moving into another job, infuse it with that, you called it UX jazz. But is
Yeah.
there some other advice you would give to someone that's seeking a career down this path?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One more generic for UX, one for researchers, because I'm a researcher, right? So I have that in mind. The more generalized advice is to learn to speak business and business speak and business talk, I should say. We get very caught up in our design speak and our UX ways, but we need to bring that. We need to convince stakeholders, right? Often enough, it goes back to us being disruptors, and so if we are able to speak the business speak, we can talk to we can talk to the strategic level, right, and have easier inroads to great design, right? And remember, it's not just about that great design, right? It's what does that great design enable for the business, right? How is it going to move the needle? Think about the C-level person who has a dashboard of some nature, because everyone loves dashboards, right? What dashboard are they probably looking at, and how is the work that you're doing as a UX are going to make that dashboard move in a positive way, right? Or what could make it go in a negative way, right? And so we need to be able to speak to that as best we can, both at a more generic business level, but also very specific to the company that we're working with. Um, on the research side, the advice I always give to folks is um, with research portfolios don't necessarily need to have designs in there. We get caught up in that, oh, it's a portfolio. I need to have like designs in there, but I'm a researcher, so what do I do? What I tell folks is show people your process, right? Have examples of the documentation that you put together to facilitate smooth, easy research, right? To bring stakeholders on board and to have a great participant experience, right? Because as researchers, a big part of our role is giving our participants a great experience when they are participating in our research, right? And so show potential employers how you approach the screener, the interview guide, even your raw notes, and then that final report. Again, I know some of that can be confidential, and so it's okay to black stuff out. That's what I do. But also, what I also suggest to folks is to go find a nonprofit or something like that, to volunteer your time to run a great study for them, and then poof, you have a great documentation set that you can make publicly available. And so by showing people your process and how smooth it is, and that you you want to show them what the results were, right? How it moved that needle on the CEO's dashboard. That's the story to tell. And it's all about that story, right? Tell a great story in terms of I came to understand the stakeholders' needs and the business goals. Here's how we approached it through this documentation. And then here's how the report addressed those stakeholder needs, right? And just showing that whole smooth process can really go a long way for a hiring manager.
Great advice. And there are a lot of researchers out there that are wondering, what am I supposed to do with my portfolio? There's a lot of questions I get down that path. So great advice. And I really appreciate the nonprofit advice because I know there's also some nonprofits out there that would love to have a great experience and improve their product, their service, their environment, whatever they're
Yeah.
selling.
And
Great.
they probably wouldn't spend the money on UX, right? They just they
No,
have their website or they have their interface or whatever it may be. That's what it is, and we don't have the money to spend on that, but the there's an opportunity to volunteer there. And the other piece of advice there worth throwing in is getting involved, right? I think one of the biggest things that has helped my career is getting involved with the UX community. UX community is a wonderful community, right? It's just a bunch of people who want to help each other and help other people, right? And so going to the conferences and volunteering at conferences and speaking at conferences or local meetups is the best way to get yourself out there and to meet people. All of my jobs have been gotten through networking, right? All of the jobs in my life has gotten through networking, and it's not, it is about what you know, but it's as they say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and the more you get out there, the better off you'll be.
some great advice. I concur with all of it. I totally agree. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Is there a way that you would like people to contact you or get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I can be reached at watchcityresearch.com, where my email address is dan@watchcityresearch.com. If people want to geek out about UX, I love just talking to people about UX. And obviously, I am a consultant, so I'd love to help folks with their UX research needs. So yeah, please do reach out if there is interest.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
You're welcome.